Our first session is called Embracing the Aging Population Trend. So at this time, I would like to introduce the presenters for the first session. Speaking first on the changing demographics of the retirement population will be Dr. Jennifer Ortman and Christopher Dick, both working with the U.S. Census Bureau. Dr. Ortman became an assistant division chief for the social characteristics in the Census Bureau's Social, Economic, and Housing Statistics Division in January. Only in the federal government would you have a title that long, right? She now coordinates the technical planning and development work pertaining to the collection, compilation, and analysis of statistics related to migration, commuting patterns, family composition, marital status, fertility. I didn't know this was going to be that exciting. Educational attainment, voting, computer and internet use, and the language. Christopher Dick is the chief of the U.S. Census Bureau's Population Projections Branch, where he leads the team of demographers who develop the official projections for the U.S. So we have a couple of real experts here, just ready to present information to this. Without further presentation, Dr. Ortman.
Okay. Just like to start off by saying thank you very much for the invitation to be here. We're really excited to talk to you a little bit about what we do at the Census Bureau with our Population Projections Program. So to that end, well, we have a fun, catchy, what we hope is an exciting title for you. But basically, we're going to talk a little bit about what our projections can tell us about what the future might hold for the U.S. population. So I'm going to start us off, and then Chris gets to finish up with the exciting pictures. So I think he got the better end of the deal on this presentation. But I'm going to start off with some background, talking a little bit about what, why, and how we make population projections. Chris is going to share with you some results from our most recent series, the 2014 National Projections, focusing, of course, for this group on the aging data that we have. And then we'll show you a little bit, a couple slides at the end to show you how to access the projections data yourselves. So the U.S. Census Bureau produces national projections. These are long-term projections, usually around 50 years out into the future. And our projections provide information about how the size and composition of the U.S. population may change over the coming decades. When we release our projections, major media outlets will often publish stories, and you can see here some of the headlines from our releases over the last couple of years. You may have seen them when you were perusing the news at the time of the release. So many of the news articles are focused on immigration as a driver of population change, diversity of the nation's racial and ethnic composition. And we've also seen a focus this decade in stories about the diversity of the child population, which is projected to become majority-minority this decade. And also another theme we're seeing in the stories and the coverage is stories about the voting population. Reporters are starting to think, what is the electorate going to look like in 2016, in 2020, and so on and so forth. And some, usually the more serious-minded folks like you, are interested in the aging story. So we'll talk a little bit about aging today. So in terms of the data we do produce, the Census Bureau produces national projections. This decade, we're trying to do this every 2 years, a little bit more frequently than we have in the past. We include demographic detail of age, sex, race, and Hispanic origin. And starting in 2014, we introduced nativity. So we're projecting the U.S. population by foreign and native-born status. And as I mentioned in the previous slide, our projections are for a 50 or approximately 50-year horizon. So right now we're focusing on going out to 2060. The Census Bureau has in the past produced state projections. This is a much less frequently produced product. We are hoping it might be something that will be on the table to do again this decade. We don't know for sure. Budgetary considerations, you know. Fewer series have full demographic detail when we do state-level projections. We have not released full detailed state projections since 1997. There was an intermediate series released in the 2000s, but it's been quite some time since we've been able to do state work. We do have links to states that produce their own projections on our website. And the University of Virginia, I think it's been about a year, maybe a little over that now, they actually produced a series for all states. So there are resources out there, and we do have links on our website to those. So why do we produce projections? Well, I would like to say it's just because they're fun. It really is fun to think about what might the future hold. And as demographers, we know a little bit about what we've seen in past trends for our population, and we can speculate, well, what might happen in the future. And thinking about what the future might hold, it's a useful thought exercise. It's really important for planning and anticipating what the needs of the nation might be. Our projections are used for a variety of purposes. They're used as the base for projections of specific populations by other federal agencies. The National Institute on Aging is interested in the older population for health planning. The Bureau of Labor Statistics uses our working age population projections for their labor force projections. And the National Cancer Institute is interested in our projection of deaths to project the incidence of cancer. Our projections are also used for resource planning by businesses and for academic research. And possibly other people are using them as well. We just don't know. Something we like to talk briefly about is how estimates differ from projections. The Census Bureau produces both population estimates and population projections. Estimates are for dates in the past and present. They're based on existing data. So generally, estimates are considered to reflect what we know the population to be, whereas projections are for dates in the future. They are based on assumptions about future demographic trends, or at least the Census Bureau's projections. We base our assumptions on demographic trends. When both an estimate and a projection are available, for example, you will find there are both estimates of the population for 2014 and projections of the population for 2014. You always want to use an estimate because the estimate is based on what we know, what our administrative sources tell us about our population. The projection relies on assumptions about the future, which may or may not be accurate. So to make projections, it's actually very simple. The complicated part is making the assumptions, but once we have assumptions, it's very simple to make a projection. You start off with a starting population. The Census Bureau usually uses its most recent decennial census. For the 2014 projections you're going to hear about in a moment, we use the 2010 census, and we actually go ahead and use our population estimates for the years that have we've seen since the 2010 census. But essentially, projections are based on a census count. We then make assumptions about future rates of fertility and future levels of migration into the United States. And so that gives us the births and the immigrants that we add to the population each year as we go forward. And then we make assumptions about mortality rates and how many people will migrate out of the United States, and we subtract the deaths and the out-migrants. And, of course, over the time, people are aging, so each year people get 1 year older if they survive or remain in the U.S. population. And that's how we get to the future population. So it's a very simple equation. The process to make the assumptions about what we think fertility rates might be, what mortality rates might be, how many people will migrate into or out of the country, it's a little bit more complicated. We spend a lot of time studying the past 20, 30 years in terms of births, deaths, and migration. We use those trends and extrapolate them out into the future to make our assumptions about what we think might happen. So our 2014 national projections are the second series of projections that we produced based on the 2010 census. They are projections of the U.S. population by age, sex, race, Hispanic origin, and we were very excited to introduce nativity into our 2014 series. These projections start out in 2014 and they go out to 2060. And they are the first series of projections the U.S. Census Bureau has ever produced that incorporate in separate assumptions about the fertility of native and foreign-born women. That was something we were very excited to be doing because fertility rates of foreign and native-born women are quite different. Foreign-born women have much higher fertility rates than native-born women. And we felt it was really important that we take that into account when we make a projection of the U.S. population so that our projections will better reflect both the size and composition of the population, taking into account those differences in fertility. So, as I mentioned, Chris gets to talk about the pretty pictures. So,
I do, and pretty pictures that I didn't even make because these were all made before I was even the branch chief of POP projections. So thank you, Jennifer, for taking care of that. But let's just go ahead and start with, before we jump into the baby boomers, let's go ahead and just take a look at the total population of the United States. And I do want to make a point here, and this is kind of what Jennifer was saying. These are actually the projections for 2014. We do at this point have released estimates for 2014, so we probably should be using those here, but these were pre-made slides, so we're going with the projection. So you're going to hear me say we project for 2014, and that might sound a little weird, but these are actually projections for 2014. So as we see here on the very top of each of these bars, we have the total population for different years going in the future. So we see in 2014, the U.S. we project has a population of about 319 million. Over the next approximately 50 years, 46, we're going to go up to a population of almost 417 million. So that's an increase of 98.1 million between 2014 and 2060. As Jennifer noted, this is the first time we've been able to do nativity projections, and I know it's not really our focus today, but I think it's so cool that I'd really like to talk about it for a couple seconds. So by native born, we mean any people who were born in the United States or were born overseas to American parents. In 2014, this population was about 276 million people, and between 2014 and 2060, we're projecting an increase of 62 million up to 339 million, which is an increase of about 22%. The interesting piece right here is that for the foreign-born, in 2014, we have a population of 42 million, but between 2014 and 2060, we're seeing an increase of another 36 million up to 78 million. I know these are a lot of numbers, but the key here is that's an increase of 85%. You can see in this yellow line here that that means the foreign-born as a share of the total population is increasing from about 13% to almost 19%. So it's an interesting change over the next 46 years. All right, let's start talking about the baby boomers. So I don't know how many of you guys have seen these type of charts before, but demographers love them. They're our favorite type of visual. We can't get enough of them. So for any of you who've seen them, we often call them population pyramids because they usually have a triangular shape. As you can see, kind of by 2030 and 2060 in the United States, it's no longer going to be a population pyramid. And Jennifer actually made the joke earlier that we're going kind of from an Egyptian pyramid to more of like a Roman column. It's kind of rectangular. So for those of you who haven't seen these type of graphs before, on the y-axis of the graph, we have single years of age. And on the x-axis, we have the population in millions. But the x-axis doesn't start over where the x and y meet. It's actually in the middle is where 0 is, and on the left, we have males, and on the right, we have females. Sorry, I have an itch in my throat right now. We wanted to give you guys just a few interesting years to look at for the baby boom cohort. And we've highlighted the baby boomers in red. So in 1965, we have the whole baby boom cohort aging into the kind of bottom of the population pyramid. And we see at this point, we have 73 million in the baby boom ages, and that's almost 40% of the total population. Unheard of in the U.S. By 2014, we see that we've had an increase of 2 million in that baby boom cohort, and this is through immigration. But instead of actually being that 40% of the total population, they're down to 24% of the total population. We were just kind of having this discussion up here before we started. They're actually no longer the largest cohort in the United States. Millennials are. So those born between, people argue about the exact dates, but those born between 1982 and 2000 are actually more than 24% of the total population now. But the interesting key here in 2014 is that the boomers are beginning to age into the classic retirement ages of 65 plus. As we move up to 2030, we see that mortality has started to impact the baby boom generation, and we're down to 61 million baby boomers and 17% of the population. The key note here about 2030 is all of the boomers are now over 65. And by 2060, we see that all but the youngest of the boomers have aged into the 100-plus population, and we're down to 3 million in the baby boom ages. All right. As much fun as that was, and as long as I'd love to talk about all those, we have a few more charts. Another way to look at this is just to focus on the population that's 65 and above. So here we have the population in millions for the 65 and above, and also their share of the total population. So in 2014, we see that the 65 and above population is 46 million, and we're projecting that to over double, up to 98 million by 2060. But we see the biggest jump here is between 2020 and 2030, and that is the years, both 2014 to 2020 and also 2020 to 2030 are the years when all the boomers are going to be aging into this population. We see after 2030, although the number of 65 plus continues to increase, the proportion of the population stays relatively stable. I love this graph because it really shows how unique the baby boom cohort is for the United States. So what this chart shows is the percent change in the population size by decade. And we started with 2000 to 2010 and then did a decade change all the way up to 2050 to 2060. The blue bars here are for the total population, and the red bars are for the 65 and over population. So between 2000 and 2010, the total population increased by 10%. 65 plus was 15%, relatively close to the total population. Between 2010 and 2020, we project the increase for the total population to only be 8%, but the 65 plus population, we project to increase by almost 40%. It's a huge increase. And then between 2020 and 2030, we see about similar for the total population and another 30% increase for the 65 plus. After 2030, we see that the 65 plus population changes a lot more similarly to the total population. Until we get to 2050 to 2060, we see a small increase, and this is due to what people call the baby boom echo, so the children of the baby boom aging into the 65 plus population. All right, so let's look even a little closer at that 65 plus population. What this chart here is showing us is the percent of those who are in the 65 plus population that are in three broad age groups: 65 to 74, 75 to 84, and 85 and over. And what we see in both 2014 and 2030 is that over half of the 65 plus population is in the 65 to 74. So they're kind of in that young end of the older population. But by 2060, we see that nearly 1 in 5 of those who are over 65 are going to be in that 85 and over population. You know, and we could see that this would probably have a large impact on how the U.S. works. All right. This one's always a little complicated to explain. We've had some discussions about the best way to explain dependency ratios. But dependency ratios are a great way to examine the changing age structure of the population, looking at both the younger and older populations relative to the size of the population that we usually define as the working ages, 18 to 64. Dependency ratios are often an indicator of the potential burden of the dependent population, approximated by those under 18 and those 65 and older on those on the working population. So how do we calculate these ratios? We divide the number of people in the dependent age groups, either 65 and above or under 18, by the number of people in the 18 to 64 population, and then multiply by 100. So on our line graph here, the old age dependency is the number of people that are 65 and above divided by the number of people who are in the 18 to 64 category times 100. So I think the thing that becomes pretty apparent pretty quickly is that old age dependency is increasing, young age dependency is decreasing, and overall dependency is slightly increasing. We actually see that in 2033, old age dependency ratios surpass the young age dependency ratios, and that's, again, right when the baby boomers have all hit 65. So it's a very interesting thing to talk about, and I'm sure what you all will be talking about for the next 2 days. All right. And then another thing that people often talk about with our projections is the increasing diversity of the United States. So what we have right here is the percent minority between 2014 and 2060. Again, the blue bars are the total population, and the red are the 65 and over. As we see, the U.S. population is going to continue to become more and more diverse. And I believe it's between 2040 and 2050, we are projected to become a majority minority country when no race or ethnic group will represent 50% or more of the total population. The older population is not currently as racially and ethnically diverse as the younger population, but it is projected to experience a substantial increase in its racial and ethnic diversity over the next several decades. At this point, the 65 and over population is only 22% minority, but by 2060 it'll be 45%. So let's put this in a little bit of context with other countries as well. What we did right here is we took some data from the Census Bureau's international database, which also does projections for all the countries other than the United States, and put the United States in just to give us a little bit of context. So on the left side here, we have data from 2014, and on the right, we have data from 2050. We see that for the world, the percent 65 and over for all of these countries, for the world, it's going to, in 2014, the percent, let me start again there. In 2014, the percent of people who will be 65 and over in the world is right around 8%. By 2050, we expect that to double up to 17%. The United States is actually has one of the youngest populations of all the developed countries. So we're right around 15% in 2014. And by 2050, we're looking at around 22%. As you can see, countries like Japan, by 2050, are going to be 40% 65 and older. Countries like Germany, Italy, Spain and Poland are going to be about a third 65 and older. So it's just, kind of helps to put things in a little bit of context. And we also see that even some of these largest developing countries like China by 2050 will have a larger proportion of their population in the 65 plus population than the U.S. All right, so that's kind of, those are all of our charts, but we also, since this presentation I think is going to be online, right, and you also have copies, we wanted to give you the URL for both the population projections data and also for our international database. And on top of that, we wanted to give you guys our contact information. Feel free to contact either Jennifer or myself, although at this point she'll probably just forward the question to me. She gets to do other stuff now. But feel free to contact either of us. If you want to contact Jennifer, you're not going to hurt my feelings. But thank you very much. If anyone has any clarifying questions, let us know.